Marge Piercy was born on March 31st in 1936 in Detroit, Michigan. She was born into a middle-class family that was impacted greatly by the Great Depression. As a child, she was raised Jewish, and Piercy found refuge in books when she nearly died from German measles and rheumatic fever in grade school. She was not close with her father and often fought with her mother. Eventually, she left home at 17 to attend the University of Michigan. She was the first in her family to attend college. She studied at the University of Michigan and received her MA from Northwestern. It was in college that Piercy became involved in political movements. She was involved in Students for a Democratic Society, Marxism movements against the war in Vietnam, and most importantly, feminist movements. The purpose of much of what Piercy wrote was to express her political and religious beliefs, but it was her mother who first inspired her to become a writer. She was a great storyteller and told Marge many stories as a young girl. Piercy published almost 20 novels and 20 books of poems. The Moon is Always Female was one of her works that was published in 1980 and is considered a classic text of the feminist movement. In 2004, she published Louder, We Can't Hear You Yet, the political poems of Marge Piercy, and it is an audio collection of poems that focus on her political views. She also published The Art of Blessing the Day, Poems with a Jewish Theme, which is a collection of poems pertaining to her family childhood and a new take on Jewish tradition, which was published in 1992. Piercy's works often dealt with class or culture issues, and she often writes from a feminist position. Her poetry has a highly personal, often angry and very emotional tone. She also generally writes in free verse. A work of Artifice is no different. The poem contains feminist ideas and is written with a personal tone and a strong sense of emotion. Marge Piercy uses a variety of poetic elements in a work of Artifice to convey the theme that women are unable to reach their full potentials due to their oppression by men and society. The poem reads,
The bonsai tree in the attractive pot could have grown 80 feet tall on the side of a mountain till split by lightning. But a gardener carefully pruned it. It is 9 inches high. Every day, as he whittles back the branches, the gardener croons, It is your nature to be small and cozy, domestic and weak. How lucky, little tree, to have a pot to grow in. With living creatures, one must begin very early to dwarf their growth. The bound feet, the crippled brain, the hair in curlers, the hands you love to touch.
The title of the poem implies a satirical tone. The author could have simply used the word art in place of artifice, but the word artifice implies a more cunning or deceptive plan within the poem. The theme might be that the trickery of men and social limitations greatly influences the oppression of women. Although the poem is not split into stanzas, it can be divided into 3 sections of 8 lines to better understand the work. The first section of 8 lines discusses the potential that the bonsai tree has to grow very tall when left alone, but instead it is only 9 inches tall because the gardener cut the branches off. The second section of the poem, the gardener prunes the tree regularly while he sings. In these lines, the author illustrates the small size and little power that the tree has, as well as how lucky the tree is to have a pot to grow in and a gardener to take care of it. In the last section, the author refers to the notion that living organisms must be restricted from a young age to ensure success. The last lines describe that in order to take control, their feet must be bound, hair curled, and minds crippled. The poem then ends with the words, "the hands you love to touch." In the last section, unlike the first 2, it becomes clear that the author is no longer referring to a bonsai tree. Bonsai trees are used as an extended metaphor throughout the poem for women. Since bonsai trees are able to flourish under natural conditions but are very small when domesticated, this implies that women would have the potential to be great if they were not confined to domestic life by society and men. In the poem, the gardener is an extended metaphor for men. The imagery of how the gardener prunes the trees and stunts its growth speaks to the way that men trick women into losing their ability to stand alone and prosper individually. The binding of the feet and hair curling are both symbolic of beauty. Traditionally, foot binding was seen as beautiful because it made the feet of women small and dainty, Additionally, bound feet make it much more difficult for a woman to get around. This adds to the theme of idealism of women who are small and cannot escape societal expectations. The curling of the hair represents how women must work and strive towards beauty. The repeated idea of a beautiful pot is symbolic of containment. In the poem, the tree is safe and protected by the beautiful pot that contains it. This develops the idea that women are safer when they are contained by society and even by a home where they are expected to stay cooped up to perform household chores and take care of children. The poet believes that the actions of men are oppressive and manipulative. In the 7th line of the poem, the author uses the word pruned. This word conveys the manipulative nature of men and implies that they can craft women to their liking. The author also uses the word whittles when referring to how the gardener cuts the branches of the tree. This word emphasizes the dominance of men and the belittling of women in this society. Crippled is used in the 4th to last line in the poem and adds to the idea of oppression. The women are facing such harsh oppression that their brains are crippled so that they are unable to think on their own and to formulate their own opinions. There is a shift of attitude that occurs in the 5th line of the poem. The first 4 lines of the poem explain the capability that the bonsai tree has to grow into something massive and powerful. This is a metaphor for how a woman can be strong, independent, and individual. The tone is extremely optimistic and positive. However, the poem then shifts towards how a gardener can tame the bonsai tree to keep it small, weak, and domesticated. This mirrors the role of men in society and their tendency to overpower and control women. The tone changes to belittling and limiting at this point. This negative tone is carried through the rest of the poem to the end. There are no stanzas or changes in line length, therefore the poem reads very fluid throughout after the shift occurs in the 5th line. After reading the poem, we now know for a fact that the title does indeed convey the idea of the cunning ways of men in society, specifically through the replacement of the word art. It demonstrates the idea that this trickery is a work of art, as it successfully keeps women from reaching their full potential. The overall theme that is developed in the poem is the oppression that women face due to cultural restrictions. The poem refers to the growth aspect of the human condition and says that women are not given a chance to grow and become strong because they are held back by men and societal expectation. One of the major factors contributing to the general feminist views in the poem was Piercy's first marriage, which ended in divorce. She loved her first husband, but his expectations of conventional gender roles in marriage and his lack of respect towards her writing caused her to leave him. In the poem, Piercy expresses the tendency of the gardener, a man, to dwarf the bonsai tree, a woman, in an attempt to limit them. Piercy explains the crippling of the brain that women experience due to the oppressiveness of men, something that she felt in her first marriage when her husband refused to support her literary works. The repeated failure that Piercy experienced as a young writer also affected her work, as she wrote novel after novel but could not seem to get her books published. Society was rejecting her feminist charged works, and this denial of unconventional gender roles relates to the bound feet that Piercy writes about. Due to her inability to publish her books, Piercy also had financial setbacks. She had to take on multiple part-time jobs to pay the bills. It was during this time that she developed into a strong, independent woman that only strengthened her feminist views, featured in her poem, A Work of Artifice. Lastly, the symbol of the bonsai tree and the gardener may have also been attributed to experiences in her life. Piercy had a love of gardening, and when she moved to Cape Cod from New York City, she took it up immediately. She had a large garden filled with fruits, vegetables, and herbs. And this love of gardening and plants may have helped inspire Piercy to choose the bonsai tree as a prominent symbol in the poem.